Hello there. How you doing? I actually grew up building lasers and also two little power supplies for helium neon lasers. Helium neon lasers, since they're transparent and they're kind of extremely obvious, there's two little mirrors, 100% mirror on one end and a 95% mirror on the other. I was told, and I always knew it was wrong, that laser light is coherent light. That's like explaining water by saying, water is wet. Well, superficially that's accurate. That it doesn't tell you the molecular structure of water or what water actually is. So this, of course, is where we are in science. I wanted to actually explain in really simple. I have a nice little crude hand-drawn diagram over here and actually talk about lasers. And I grew up, and so did you, and they still stick that garbage in kids' textbooks. Hey kids, I'm going to tell you what a laser really is. They show a textbook showing photons or a light as like little snakes moving side to side, except they're stacked on top of each other, whereas the snakes are moving in various different directions. In the case of a light bulb, they've got the snakes, the waves of light. Of course, there's no such thing as a wave, because a wave is not what something is, rather what something does, which I've explained countless thousands of times, moving side to side. And of course, when all these snakes are packed on top of each other or together, and their wiggles are aligned, then that's laser light. That's actually what they tell kids in school, and that's actually what everybody in college actually thinks too. The truth is something a lot more simple than that, and blatantly obvious, because everything is constructive and destructive interference, and all of quantum and general relativity has no idea what light is. They have 1,000 suppositions about the nature of light which are wholly inaccurate, that light's an emission, it's a wave or a particle or wave-particle duality, or light has a speed, and a few other things, and all those things are completely incorrect. Let me point out the fact that holography was invented before lasers existed to create these pseudo-lasers, if you will. Dennis Gabor took light from an ordinary mercury arc lamp and passed it through a pinhole. Mercury's emissions lines, of course, made it nearly monochromatic of a singular frequency, and the pinhole gave it spatial coherence. Yeah, I'd like to show a little simple diagram. It only took me about 5 minutes to draw that, but you could gather a lot from it. And the truth is that in-phase emissions causes the amplification of light, but it actually doesn't cause the coherency of light, because the atoms of the light's so-called emissions, if you will, or the manifestations of what light actually is, which I have countless other videos on, that it's in phase with incoming light that will amplify the light, but the amplification of incoherent light is occurring also, and that doesn't make it coherent. In-phase emissions in lasers don't even create in-phase light in the first place. In-phase emissions are important, of course, but they only cause light amplification. In-phase is, of course, constructive interference. So in-phase coherency of laser light is for amplification of the laser, not the nature of the laser itself, which is point source light, or you can call them spherical light. There's another name for spherical light too. Most people don't know what spherical light is. I have a really simple diagram here. I have an incoherent light source over here. I've drawn a light bulb, which actually has, of course, several different frequencies. We could talk about standard white light from the sun. And over here we actually have a pinhole aperture. Now this, of course, is spatial coherency. And this is also to amplification. And this is, of course, the reason, not that I want to get into that in here, the dual slit experiment is so commonly misunderstood. People think light's an emission and is traveling, but this is the actual spatially coherent amplification of light, because right now we have an incoherent light source over here, but we have a pinhole source here. Just as the first holography was created before lasers existed, that's a hardcore fact. People think, well, you need lasers to make holograms. Well, you generally do, but you need a point source light. Laser light is point source light, so we actually have a point source light here. We have pinhole. This is a spatial filter. Another way of looking, we say, well, this is spatially coherent. Now we have a pinhole aperture here. But to say a pinhole aperture, think about this, is because it's really important. pinhole aperture is also, too, a spatial filter. Now, this is the upside-down, backwards way of actually creating a laser. In the case of the mercury arc lamp, it was already monochromatic, so we don't need an actual wavelength filter over here in the case of Dennis Gaver's first holography, which didn't use lasers. It uses monochromatic light of a singular frequency, but it also, too, needed to have a spatial filter. And the spatial filter, what these other people are calling spatially coherent light. And right over here, we actually have a frequency or a wavelength filter. Yeah, this of course makes it monochromatic of a singular frequency. In case of white light or a white light bulb, for example. Most people also don't know that every laser out there, people think, as really the whole world does, because most people don't take lasers apart and they didn't build them like I do, that there are sets of lenses on lasers, LED lasers, chemical lasers, gas tube lasers, helium, neon, so on and so on and so forth. Even on this little simple LED laser right here, you know, there's a 3-element plastic set of lenses right here on the end. People think, well, lasers emit out this lightsaber of light, but they actually don't. They don't. That actually shocks people when I tell them that. It's like, you know, lasers don't emit out like a lightsaber beam of light. Sure they do. It's like, no, what does that are the spatially coherent laser light is made to be focused. Yeah, same is true of any helium, neon, or gas, or chemical, or any other type of lasers. There is a confocal array. Starlight, for example, has coherent links in thousands of kilometers, and starlight is far, far, far more coherent than any human man-made laser ever created, and the most distant stars are just like ideal point sources. An ideal point source is no different than saying a spatial filter. Astronomer A.A. Michelson discovered that Betelgeuse is the least coherent light from any star, and there's a reason for that. Betelgeuse star is the closest star. Since it's the closest, it's the least like a pinhole aperture of light, and therefore has the lowest coherency. Yeah, because distance acts like a spatial pinhole or spatial filter in the case of light. So in-phase emission causes the amplification of light, but it doesn't cause the coherence of light, because the atoms generate the light in phase with incoming light. They will therefore amplify the light, but also to incoherent light. I mentioned that already. So when a laser is first turned on, it fluoresces and a light is generated. We can't say emits light because nothing emits light. But we're all stuck with that brain virus in our head that something emits light. We think we flip a switch and light bulb turns on, or a laser. You know, that light is being emitted. You know, something is being emitted from here to here, and that's not the case. Everything is in ether perturbation modality. It's not an emission, it's a disturbance of the medium. That medium, of course, being the ether, just as Nikola Tesla said, light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Well, nothing emits sound. Sure it does. Speed of sound. Speed of sound is the hysteresis, or the rate of induction, of a disturbance of the hydrogen and oxygen, which of course is what sound is a disturbance in the medium. It's the reason why Nikola Tesla said light is nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. People didn't really look into that statement very deeply on what Nikola Tesla said. Highly accurate. So anyway, when a laser is first turned on, it fluoresces at different light circuits start out from different parts of the laser. After a few thousand mirror bounces, according to how we're told, the light waves being added and subtracted for in just one single point source of EM emission. Well, people don't understand what a point source is. The only thing that actually defines a magnet, for example, is that it is a point source object. I keep telling people this and they don't realize the significance, not that this is a magnet. The only thing that actually defines a magnet is not quantitative, rather qualitative. Before this becomes a magnet, if this were a magnet, it is quantitatively identical. But what therefore then defines a magnet? Well, therefore a magnet is not quantitative, rather a qualitative object, wherein the magnetic field is a point source. This is the reason why you'll see the plane of inertia using magnetic viewing film of any magnet. That's point source. A laser is no different. This is constructive interference. This is the reason why people are fascinated by magnets and lasers. Lasers are fascinating. Magnets are also fascinating. What fascinates people about magnets is really simple. I don't know if you ever thought about it, is the field is ab extra to the object itself, the magnet. But a magnet is only a magnet. It is a magnet. Yes, it is, but it is quantitatively identical before it was deemed a magnet. This means the nature of magnetism, not magnetism, but of a magnet is qualitative. The qualitative difference between a pre-magnet and a magnet is that it is a point source. What a laser is constructive interference point source light with a spatial filter. Depends on the type of laser. LEDs themselves are a point source by their very nature. I don't know if you know what an LED actually is. Have you ever looked at an LED under a microscope? 99.9% of lasers today are LEDs. They're extremely high efficiency. They don't take up much power. An LED is essentially a point source. To create a point source in like the helium neon lasers that I worked with, grew up with, those are hard to find now and they're quite expensive. They're fun to experiment with. Is that they generate point source using 100% mirror and a 95% mirror. They generate a point source. And the point source is the same as a pinhole aperture. Pinhole aperture, as I told you, is a spatial filter. It's really kind of stupid, although accurate, to call it spatially coherent light. You take any sort of incoherent light source over here, you have a pinhole, well, it's spatially coherent. That's true, but in people's brains to process things easier, it is much simpler for a young mind or an old mind to understand that this little pinhole is a spatial filter. And over here we have a frequency filter, yeah? Or a wavelength filter, where we have monochromatic light now. And all we have to do then, since it is spatially coherent and it is monochromatic, is we put a set of focusing lenses over here, and then we end up with that lightsaber of light that fascinates people so much, which is great for reading CDs and burning DVDs and CDs, and lasers are good for a billion things, everything. Every person in the United States probably got 20 or so lasers in various devices in their house. Easily 20. I've probably got 100 actually. So most types of lasers actually emit spreading, non-parallel light. Lasers and CD players and laser pointers like this one are, of course, semiconductor diode lasers who create cone-shaped light beams. And if the parallel beams are desired, they require a focusing set of lenses. Same is true for the lasers in inexpensive laser pointers. Take apart any old laser pointer, which I've done many, many, many times. You'll find the little plastic lens or lenses in front of the diode laser inside. Classroom helium neon lasers also create spreading light. The laser tube with a typical classroom laser contains at least one curved mirror called a confocal arrangement and creates light in the form of a spreading cone. It is a little-known fact, almost nobody knows, that manufacturers of classroom lasers traditionally place a convex lens at the end of the laser tubes in order to shape the spreading light into that lightsaber beam of light that everybody is familiar with. It fascinates them about lasers. So while it's true that a narrow beam is convenient, part of the reason is to force the laser to fit our stereotype in our minds that all lasers produce this narrow beam, which is not the case. Manufacturers could save money by selling real lensless laser tubes which have spreading beams, but customers would complain, wouldn't they, because it would be pretty useless. Yeah, they need those focusing lenses. So what laser light truly is point source light. A laser is the light equivalent of a magnet. Let me repeat that again. In my opinion, it's a fact. Something makes nature really simple to understand. Point source. A laser is basically a point source light object. Yes? No different than a magnet. These are both point source objects. By the way, magnets and lasers make possible about 95% of our current technology. Did you know that? Yeah. Isn't that interesting? All the read-write of either tape data or solid-state drives or optical CDs or DVDs, laser precision, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And what do lasers... there's not a single article or video out there on YouTube that will tell you the very simple fact, makes things simple, that the nature of most of our technology is point source technology. A laser is just nothing other than a light magnet, because a magnet is a point source object and a laser is a point source object. It's easier to think of it in terms of a spatial filter. It's not what completes a laser. You know, this is not all lasers. This is taking incoherent light source and actually passing it through a spatial filter and a wavelength filter and then focusing it, and then you have laser light. Yep. Right. That's what a laser is. There are different types of lasers. Diode lasers, which is about 99% of current lasers, gas tube lasers, chemical lasers. There's about 10 different types of lasers. Synthetic ruby tube there's some fascinating ones. The really ultra high power lasers that require like a power generator the size of a Volkswagen. Those are fascinating. They're a special breed of lasers, but they're all the same thing. They're spatial filtered and they're already wavelength filtered. This is in the case of taking incoherent light and passing it through a spatial filter and a wavelength filter and then focusing it. But there are ways to achieve things with greater efficiency. That's the reason why LED lasers like this are so efficient. It's because all the energy is already in the form of spatial filter, because a diode is incredibly tiny. A diode, by essence, starts out as its own pinhole. That's the reason why lasers, basically all current lasers used, essentially all current lasers used except for super high energy military lasers and whatnot, they're all diode lasers. By the way, they've gotten diode lasers up to insane levels of energy. Even the kid that creates all the super dangerous laser toys on YouTube, even he doesn't know what a laser is. He builds things and he messes with it, but he doesn't know what an actual laser is. He doesn't have any video on that. Sure he knows. This guy's got thousands of videos building laser devices, lightsabers, and some other weird things. You know, very powerful laser. Still doesn't know what a laser is. I can never explain it to you that simply. He would just say the same thing that he was told to believe it. Laser light's coherent light. Well, superficially that's kind of accurate, but that's not what makes up a laser. Anyway, I hope I explained this to you very simply, and it was simple. Spatial filtration, frequency filtration, or in the case of diodes, they already start out with a spatial filter, because the diode is essentially a pinhole filter. This diode's really small. Don't need a spatial filter in the case of diodes. All laser diodes only require, and even now they don't, frequency filtration. Some of them don't even require frequency filtration. The only thing they need is confocal lenses. So you're talking about a diode and sometimes one, usually two or three, focusing lenses too. It's the reason why laser diodes, like in your CD burner and whatnot, they're really tiny. They're about that big. They don't need much. They're already spatially filtered. They're energy pre-spatial filtration. Yeah, it's trying to make it complicated even though it's not. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you do, check out my description below and have a good day. Goodbye.